Hello, I'm Pastor Matt Nettesheim, the Grace Baptist Temple in Chesapeake, Virginia, and today have the privilege of meeting with Dr. Tom Wallace, and just want to say thank you to begin with for meeting with me this morning.
Well, you're welcome, Pastor Matt. I'm delighted to share in this time.
Yes, sir, and looking forward to it. I want to accomplish is just to get to know Dr. Tom Wallace. He has served the Lord for years. I remember getting a book, Elmer Towne's 10 Great Soul-Winning Churches, and I read about your ministry in Maryland and eventually into Louisville, and it inspired me and helped me. And then a little bit more background, when I became pastor of Grace Baptist Temple in 2009, Dr. Wallace met me in Elizabeth City, and for 2 days spent hours with me and helped me in the ministry, and I appreciate that.
Okay. You know, that's amazing about Dr. Towne's book. The 10 churches that he mentioned in one of his books, all 3 of the churches that I pastored are in that book. Out of 10, 3 of those churches were the ones that I pastored, which I thought was just really something else. And I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, the one in Maryland, what was the name of that church?
It was a Baptist Bible Church of Elkton, Maryland.
Yes, sir. And then the church in Louisville?
And that one was Beth Haven Baptist Church in Louisville. Yes. And then eventually I became pastor of Franklin Road Baptist Church until I retired in the year 2000 and went out on the road.
Yes, sir.
But it's been an exciting life so far. I'm going to be 89 this year, and I've been preaching for 68 years, and it's really been an experience. Look back with great joy, and we had all kind of valleys as well as a lot of mountains. But I've just been so pleased with the way the Lord has proven himself in so many ways, and how he's nursed me through some battles and helped me over some of the humps that we come in contact with.
Yes, sir.
And all of that, I believe, it was part of a schooling and training to prepare me for whatever he's had for the days to come.
Yes, sir. Now, where did you grow up?
Well, I was born over in the mountains of West Virginia in a little town called Odd. Everybody laughs when I tell them the name of the place. I told them, I told them that Abraham was born in Ur, and Job was in Uz, and I was in Odd. So it gives me some pretty good company. But the little town is near Beckley. It was a coal mining town. And the only thing you could do there to make a living was, unless you worked in one of the 3 grocery stores and the post office, you had to cut timber for the mines, or you had to work in the mines. And so when the young men would get to be out of high school, and they'd work a couple of years, but they'd move out to one of the big cities somewhere. And so it was continually losing all of our young men. And finally it just dwindled to nothing, and there's nothing there now but a wide place on the road.
Wow.
But when I was 11 years old, the Depression was going on. I was born in 1930, and the Depression was real bad in 29 and 30. And we got hungry, so Dad moved us up to Pennsylvania near Philadelphia, and he got a job with General Motors. And we were able to go to the schools there, and I grew up in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, and graduated from high school. And I went to get a job at General Motors after graduation from high school, and a young fellow named Ernie Haybacker was working on the assembly line. I was putting on upholstery inside the car, and Ernie was putting on door handles outside the car, and he was a young Christian. He had a New Testament in his pocket. All the rest of us had cigarettes in our pocket. But Ernie kept witnessing to me, and over a period of several weeks, he was able to get the gospel to me, and I got born again. And he got me to giving my testimony at a little lunchtime service that we had there on the assembly line. And then he asked me if I'd get a message together. He began to give the message to about 30 or 35 fellows who would just stop when the line shut down. We'd have our lunch, and then we would all just gather in this one place, and he'd give us a little devotion. And then he got me to doing it on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And first thing you know, it got into my blood, and I began to feel the Lord calling me to preach.
How old were you when you trusted Christ as your Savior?
I was 20 years old when I got saved, and then immediately he had me working. So I really started preaching right there at 20 years of age. And now I've been preaching for 68 years, going into 69 years now.
Praise the Lord.
But he just kept using me. And then when the Lord put his hand on me, my wife and I had been saving our money before we got married, and we had enough money saved up to make a down payment on a brand new house. A brand new house in that day cost us $6,750.
Wow.
For a beautiful brand new 2-bedroom with one bath, and it was just perfect. And then within 1 year, the Lord wanted me to quit my job, sell my house, and go to Bible college, so we did that. And that step of obedience brought the favor of God upon me more than anything I've ever experienced. We got down to Tennessee Temple University in Chattanooga, and the Lord began to work supernatural miracles to enable me to work at running a bus route and then visiting for the church for Dr. Lee Robertson 20 hours a week. He paid me $1 an hour, 20 hours for $20. And by this time we had 2 children, and we were able to get the children fed, and house rent paid, and school bill paid. And in 2 years and 9 months, I got my 4-year degree.
Wow.
And every bill was paid, in spite of the fact that it was absolutely no money. I wish I had time to go into some of the supernatural miracles. One of the things he did was to work it out for me to get food from the back of a cafeteria. After they fed the students, there was always an abundance of food left over. And they worked it out for me to go there at lunchtime and get platters of food and take it home, and there was enough there for 2 meals. I did it every day. I did it over 700 times.
Wow.
And it all was an answer to one prayer when we ran out of food. I sat down at the table with my wife and prayed the Lord would feed us, and it started then.
Amen.
And for 2 solid years, over 700 times, we got a full meal. And I was able, instead of going to a factory to work, I was able to go soul winning every day and work on a bus route every week. And that was the best background training that I could ever have.
What was Highland Park Baptist
Church?
Yes,
it was Highland Park Baptist, Tennessee Temple University.
Some might not even know who Lee Robertson is.
Yeah, Dr. Robertson, one of the most fabulous preachers, one of the greatest leaders that I ever met. And he took that church. There were several hundred there, but it wasn't long before the several thousand. And while I was there, we were averaging over 10,000 every Sunday.
10,000?
Yes, they had about 35 or 40 little churches or chapels scattered around the area. The students were pastoring as part of their training, but they counted that into the Sunday school and church count. That was amazing. And as soon as I graduated from school, I had no idea what I was going to do. I didn't know if the Lord wanted me to be a pastor or a missionary or a teacher in a school, and I never did know until I graduated. And when I graduated, I wasn't real sure whether I'd go to seminary or whether I would. Just didn't know. And I went home to visit my people, and the guy who had led me to Christ asked me to come down and have dinner with him, and we were sitting around the table fellowshipping after the meal, and his phone rang, and he went off in the bedroom to talk. And when he came back with a little smile on his face, he said, "Looks like you're going to have to pastor my church." He said, "I've just accepted a position in Oklahoma City, and that's going to mean my church doesn't have a pastor, so you just finished your training." So boom, within about 3 or 4 days of graduation, I was pastor of the church.
You're a pastor. Wow.
I think that might have been the reason why the Lord kind of pressed me to take summer school courses and do it in 2 years and 9 months instead of 4 years.
Yes, sir.
Because I think the Lord saw a hole 2 years and 9 months ahead of time, and he just picked me and put me there, trained me and put me there.
Yes.
It was the Lord's doing, And I stayed there 17 years.
That was Elkton, Maryland?
Elkton, Maryland, the Baptist Bible Church. We had about 35 people there, and they were all divided up. You know, we really had two groups. One group was for me, and one group was against me.
And you were 22, 23?
Yeah, I was 24 by that
24.
time. And when I was 24 years old, we had civil war, because one of the group wanted a deeper life church, and all I knew was soul winning. I didn't know anything about preaching. You know, one of the ladies there had been a Pentecostal woman preacher, and she wanted her son to pastor the church, and he didn't want to do it. And so he encouraged them to call me, and they did. And when I got there, of course, she set out to discourage me and run me off, and thought maybe if she could get rid of me, then he would take it. And she walked up to me and said, "Undoubtedly, young man, that was the sorriest sermon I've ever heard in my life." And I was crying when I was praying, "Lord, I don't know how to handle the situation." And I prayed, "Lord, kill her, Lord." I didn't know that 1 John 5:16 was in the Bible. It says, "There is a sin unto death, but I do not say ye shall pray for it."
Yes, sir.
And all mine said, I shouldn't have prayed that, and I've never prayed it since.
Amen.
But the Lord took care of that problem after about 6 months, and then the Word began to grow, and we grew, you know, to...
Did the Lord kill her?
No.
Okay,
She
good.
ended up in Johns Hopkins Hospital for a long time.
Oh, yes.
He almost did, but he got her out of our hair, you know.
Yes, sir.
And she hung around a little while, but she carried a lot of physical problems the rest of her life.
Yes, sir.
But and there were several other people involved, and they went through some tragedies also. I think the Lord was pushing them out. But he cleared the air, and we leveled off. We'd grow up to a couple hundred a Sunday, and then it would level out for a year or so, and then we'd move up to 300 or 350. And we finally ended up having about 1,100 a Sunday. Our Christian school went up to about 600, and we had a full-time printing ministry with 5
Wow.
full-time people printing. Ran about 15 buses every Sunday.
Now, what about your building? You start with 35. Did you have the facilities?
Well, we had to relocate. One of the major problems we had for a while was that we had 194 theater seats, and we had about 500 people coming trying to get those seats. Now that does pose a little problem.
A little bit of a problem.
But the Lord gave us 10 acres of ground in a miraculous way, helped us to get a building up that would take care of our congregation. And we relocated about 2.5, 3 miles away, and then the work moved on up and went into its zenith. It just really became a tremendous ministry. And you know, I was happy. I planned to spend the rest of my years there. That was all I cared about. And the Lord began to speak to me about going to Louisville, and I fought it. I just tried to find excuses not to go, but he just wouldn't get off of it. And I ended up accepting the Beth Haven Baptist Church. It had about 1,200 people coming, and it was very successful work. Had a good sized staff.
When you came to Beth Haven,
yes,
it was running 1,200.
Yes, right. And this was back in 1971. And
wow.
And when I got there, we started a bus director school. And we brought in, over a period of time, we had about 165 or 70 families who came there. Man would come with his wife and children and spend 1 year with us training in the bus ministry. And I had gone to that church to help them start their bus ministry several years before. And when I went there to become pastor, they were ready to launch the bus ministry.
Wow.
They said, "We have 5 men who are willing to buy a bus. And we have 5 men who are willing to be captained over the bus, and we have 5 men who are willing to drive the bus." So this is 15 men, and I went down and met with those men 2 or 3 days, several meetings, and then we launched that bus ministry, and then we had a real good bus director that helped us to start a bus director school. And right in those early 70s, everybody wanted a bus ministry.
Yes.
So we started training them, and as a result, these fellows would come and train, and then we would send them out to a church, and they would have a full-time position. And we had, Dr. Howes was running about 200 buses at that time. Bob Gray down in Jacksonville was running about 50 or 60 buses. Dr. Robertson, had, I don't know how many. And we got up to 42 routes. So within 2 years of the time I got there, we went from 1,200 up to about average 3,400 a Sunday.
Wow.
We were having over 100 people come forward every Sunday, either to be saved or joined by letter. And we were baptizing over 50 every Sunday for over 2 years. And the work just boomed. And it just amazing. And I stayed there 20 years. And then the Lord just impressed me to give it up.
Beth Haven, you stayed for 20 years at that church. Now, I was speaking to Mickey Carter at one time. And he said sometime, I think it was in the 70s, there was a big fight for the Christian schools.
Yeah.
And he mentioned going to the church there, your church right there.
Yeah.
There was a big meeting, and Dr. Gibbs and a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Well, we had problems twice with the state about the Christian schools. Back in Elkton, we started the first school. And this was in the early -- and there were no schools. And
why did the Christian school movement start?
We started our school because my children would come home crying because the teachers were insisting that the children dance and that they do all kind of, and we would talk to the teachers, and they know this is what we're going to do. Well, our children were being taught one thing in the home, and and we were talking about movies and the way they dressed, and just basic standards and separation. And when the children went over there, they were being picked on by the teacher, being embarrassed. And so we started our school to pull our children out. And a lot of our church people felt the same way, so they joined with us. And when we started the school, the state began to threaten to arrest our parents for truancy laws, that the children weren't in school and they wouldn't recognize their schools. So we worked on going down to Easton, Maryland to talk to the legislatures. And I had several services where we brought the people who were running for office. I had a big Sunday called the Political Sunday right before the election, and we had 85 people who were running for some office, U.S. Senate, State Senate, House of Representatives, and for the local sheriffs and county offices. 85 showed up.
Wow.
And we had our school children all dressed up and had them sing, and we showed them the classrooms, and they were so impressed. Then we went down to Annapolis and met with them individually and told them what the state was trying to do to us. And as a result of working with them, they passed some laws for the whole state of Maryland.
Wow.
And it was the first state that was able to have perfect freedom from all that suppression. When we got over to Louisville,
now, in Maryland, I met Carl Bieber.
Carl Bieber.
And he worked hand in hand with the schools.
When Carl came, we had 200 in our school, and just after a little while, we were up 600.
Wow.
He did an amazing job. He really
Amen.
did. And now he was instrumental in helping us to get through this. We had a fellow there, there was a fellow named Earl Lee who is a very good friend of Mickey Carter. He lives there, and Mickey Carter's worked there. He was instrumental in helping us get away from the state controls.
Yes.
When we got to Louisville, we had a fellow named Guy Goodell who was pastor. He's up in New York now, near Albany. And Guy Goodell and Earl Lee again got together and wrote a book called The Trojan Horse. It was the story of the state trying to get its head into our religious system, and mess it all up. But anyway, they went to work on this and got the whole state of Kentucky free. So we had 2 states, and then of course some of the other states. And then it wasn't long before we had about 10,000 schools going strong across America. But it was a great foundation, and that was the days, I guess, when Brother Carter had gotten acquainted with this through Earl Lee. But when I got to Louisville, they had a great program set up called the 9 Points of Progress, and they had an individual who was going to be sort of a chairman over. One's going to see about getting us on the radio in the city. And he did a study of how many radio stations there are and how many people would be listening, how much it would cost, and all this. Another person was going to launch the bus ministry. Another person was going to help us get the Christian school started. And when I got there, it was all primed, and the hammer was back on the pistol. And so I just launched all 9 programs at one time. And I called the radio station and said, hey, can we start Sunday? They've been working on it 2 or 3 years, you know, and had it all planned.
Wow.
And, you know, we're gonna start a school. I just started hiring teachers and kicked it off. And first thing you know, we had triple the work.
What amazing.
And it was amazing. And we had to build buildings and all this sort of thing. And then that of course, the building progress, everything brought lots of problems, and we struggled through some of those problems.
Like what type of problems?
Well, when we got into that growth, we only had 700-seat auditorium.
Yeah, that would be a
and
big
with
problem.
3,300 people coming, we had to have overlap services and had to have more than one service. We had a huge school building that had, an education building for our church, but right next door to an elementary school. The elementary school was overflowing. They came and appealed to us to use our building during the week for classrooms, because they were right across the driveway. And we said, okay, we'd be glad to do that if you'll let us use yours on Sunday. So we swapped out with them, and we got about 13 big classrooms, plus their big cafeteria for an auditorium.
Yeah.
So we put 3rd and 4th grade in the classrooms for Sunday school and had church for the 5th and 6th graders. Then we switched them, and that took care of several hundred while our buildings. Well, then we relocated and built the 3,300-seat auditorium.
Wow.
And we had some finance problems because the finance house was carrying our mortgage collapsed. The government really shut them down.
What is a finance house?
Well, this was a bond corporation down in Atlanta.
A lot of churches use the bond program.
Yes, and they had 70 offices open across America, and it was one of the safest investments that anybody could ever get into. And the Securities Commission in Washington didn't want that to those people to have freedom. It was identical to the Christian school. The Education Department of Washington didn't want Christian schools because every student that went to a Christian school would cost them several $1,000s money that they would get from the government to teach in the school. So, if we had 100 students, it's going to cost them several $100,000 of tax money that they couldn't collect from the federal government. So they would try to shut us down, and it was a finance thing for them. Well, the same thing about the Securities Commission. They didn't want churches to have that freedom, so they moved in, and now we won the battle, but we lost the war. They ruined our reputation through newspaper and all, and scattered a lot of our people. It was a real heartache and a struggle. 57 churches had to declare bankruptcy in order to survive, including us.
What was the interest rate on them?
Well, there was a time when interest rate was up to 18%.
Huh.
And but at this point we had, they were selling bonds to our people and selling our bonds to other people. And it was spread out all over the Christian family across the nation, but the Securities Commission came in and just ruined all that. They wouldn't let us have that freedom, and there was a lot of folks that struggled. Everybody finally got through it.
Yeah.
It included some of the largest works. It included Jerry Falwell's work in Lynchburg, and then some of the large churches up in Ohio were involved in some of the big churches in Florida. We finally struggled through it, and it took several years to get out of it. But another story. But I stayed there till the Lord impressed me to give it to my associate pastor, and I moved out into about 6 years out on the road. and loved it. Oh, my wife and I traveled all over America and around the world.
Do you travel in an RV?
No, we just went by car and van. I had a van, and we would travel almost. I went to California, and I told the fella he wanted me to come for a week of meetings, and I said, no, I'm not going to come all the way to California for one meeting. I'll come out there, and I'm going to take 6 weeks, and you book me all around. You know who I would preach for and who I wouldn't, and you know who would want me and who wouldn't. So I'm going to block off 6 weeks from the middle of January to the end of February, when it's snowing up in New England and when it's cold in Ohio. I'll be in California, and so he put me in 15 places, and I went out there and just went from place to place, and it was, and of course I'd preach on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. Sometimes we'd have revival from Sunday to Wednesday, but in the meantime we'd go sightseeing. So we saw everything there was to see in California.
Wow.
Then when we take a meeting in Colorado, we see everything, so we saw everything. And we saw Niagara Falls, and we saw the Grand Canyon, and,
Yes,
and we saw all of the aquariums and all this. So we saw everything there was to see while we were doing the work of the Lord. Now, I've never had any interest in going to any of these places on vacation or sightseeing, because we didn't need to. We got to do it without all of that expense and without a lot of time. And so the Lord let us do it that way, and we saw everything you can see. And when I talk to my wife now about going anywhere, she said, "Oh, I don't know, we've already seen that. We've already been there and done that and got the T-shirt."
Wow.
So, but anyway, we were real happy for about 5.5 years. And she said, "I don't think I can do this anymore. You're going to have to go by yourself." And I said, "Oh, no, I'm not about to go by myself." And all of a sudden, we both got unhappy. And for several months, we were just unhappy. Mm. We would go to a church, and the church didn't seem to care whether we were there or not. We'd get there, and they had a revival meeting in the spring and the fall on the calendar, and you have to have somebody come and do it. So I would go do it, and they would, and I'd tell my wife, I said, "Well, honey, just 2 or 3 more days, and we can leave." We didn't have any heart for it. They didn't care. It didn't make any difference to anybody. So we were very unhappy with that. And then all of a sudden, this church opened up. Now, I hadn't had lots of churches that had invited me to come, over that period of time, but I had no interest. There was no leading at all. And all of a sudden, here's a church that wants me to come. And it was over in South Carolina, and I'd been in that church a number of times. It was a fantastic church. And we went over there and talked to them, and I preached for them. And they wrote me a letter and said, "Dear Pastor Wallace, thank you so much for coming. We really enjoyed having you here. Appreciate you taking the time, and we'd like for you to know that we've called Dr. Bob Kelly to be our pastor." So I said, "I guess that settles that. The will of the Lord is pretty plain now." But then within about 2 or 3 days, the people at Bob Kelly's church, the Franklin Road Baptist Church, had contacted me and wanted me to come and talk to them.
Wow.
And bang, the door wide open, and it wasn't but just a few days till I was back.
This is in the early 90s?
This was 91.
1991.
Yeah.
And then Murfreesboro, you have the Bill Rice Ranch,
yes,
the Sword of the Lord.
Yes, they're both there, real close. And our church had both of those people. We had 50 or 60 people off of the staff. Some of our deacons were staff members at the ranch. Yeah. We had all kinds of people. Dr. John Rice was a member of our church. Dr. Bill Rice had helped start our church.
Wow.
Then Ron Comfort was a member of our church. And of course, all of the Sword of the Lord employees were there.
At that time, was Curtis Hudson a part of the church?
Yes, Curtis came, after Dr. Rice passed it over to him. Then Curtis was a member of our church for a good long while. And so now that was a great blessing in all those mature people. But we had, at one time I had 21 preachers sitting in my congregation. And many of them were moving around all over the country,
yes.
in full-time service of their own. And we had lots of preachers who came there for R&R. They'd have a bad experience in their church, and they'd resign and come down and spend a year or 2 years with us, and then they would, relocate to a new place. So it was a good place to come and be among people. But there was a problem. The problem was that we had 3 churches under one roof. And Dr. Kelly, he alerted me to that because they had their programs. The Bill Rice Ranch had its program. Sword of the Lord had its program. And when they had conferences, of course, they were involved in that, and the church would have to just take a second back seat. And so it was real hard. Well, when I got there, there was a little bit of dissension, and, some struggling, because one of those groups would have a big national meeting and the other one would have a national meeting, and they would be advertising for the same crowd of people.
Right.
And they would be a little bit of rivalry there, and we'd be caught in the middle of it. And so when any kind of a big issue came up, a national issue, the Billy Graham issue was a big issue. John Rice was right there, and he began to speak to that. And then when Jerry Falwell began to drift off to the left a little bit about separation in music and standards and everything, Curtis Hudson was pretty frank about that, and he was one of us. And so we were forced into issues that we weren't dealing with. We were on a local level, and they were working on a national level.
Right.
And so I sensed that the Lord had sent me there to unify and harmonize that church. And I began to work toward that. And it wasn't long before Dr. Hudson, in his wisdom, realizing that he was creating a real problem for us, started the church on his own.
Wow.
And a few of the people that had come with him from Atlanta went with him to his little new church. And eventually he turned it over to his son while he continued his ministry. And one of my men came and said that was a shame about what Brother Hudson did. I said, no, that wasn't a shame at all. That was the best thing that ever happened to our church. Wow. Because it took that issue out, and Brother Hudson was able to maintain his friendship with us.
Yes.
And he was one of my best friends, and I didn't lose any relationship at all. Well, then Dr. Bill Rice had an issue with Dr. Hiles, and he wanted us to join with him in the issue, and I didn't feel it was our place to do it, and I wouldn't go along, so he felt like he wanted to move out. And when he moved out, somebody said, well, that was a shame. No, that's the second best thing ever happened. Well,
amen.
That reduced the size of our crowd a little bit. We maybe 60 or 70 people. But then just about that time, the Saturn plant opened about 40 miles south of us, and about half of Michigan moved down there. And when they did, those people coming out of Michigan were choir members and deacons and Sunday school teachers, and most of them were tithers, and they just began to flood into our church.
Amen.
First thing you know, we were way out ahead of where we were before. And so it looked like the Lord had programmed it that way. He sent me there, and I told them when they called me that I'm getting some age on me. And I said, I think I can do a good job for you for about 10 years, but I'll be too old after that. And I'm going to be looking for somebody to step in and take it. And one of my old deacons said, Brother Wallace, I don't want to embarrass you by asking you how old you are, but would you mind telling us how old you're going to be in 10 years? So in 9 years, we were able to find Dr. Mike Norris.
Yes.
And began to pray about it and work with him. And in the year of 1999, in January, he came for the first Sunday. We had voted to accept him as our pastor 1 year from that date.
Wow.
So he would be pastor of the church and take over the full responsibility the year 2000 on January 1st. Now they gave us 1 year of both of us just preaching halftime, and both of us assuming his responsibilities while he got acquainted, and I began to loosen up, back up, and it just worked out just very, very smooth.
Amen.
We were so happy about the way it worked out. And then I maintained my position there as pastor emeritus. I built a residence on the property while I was pastoring, and I paid for the house, but I deeded it to the church. Worked out a contract with them that I would live in the house. The church would own it. It would be church property. They'd maintain it, cut the grass, take care of all of the repairs and all that sort of thing, and they'd pay utilities. And then when I died, when my wife died, then the church would assume the property. So it was a win-win thing, and everybody was happy with it. Now we're still maintaining that. It's been almost 20 years.
Wow.
And I've lived there free, which is a benefit and a blessing, and I don't have to go every Sunday, you know, in order to get the grocery bill paid.
Yes.
Because I don't have a lot of outgo. But it's been a good arrangement, and everybody's very happy. And I travel most of the time, but my wife has a place to be among some of the ladies. And then also I'm able to be there on Wednesday nights a whole lot, and then sometimes on Sunday. And I've been trying to cut back a little bit so that I can be there more. But I just slip in, and I said I don't get involved a whole lot because
Yes,
I don't want to. I don't want to have my own congregation. It's his congregation, and he's done a great job for about 19 years now.
Amen.
Yeah.
Now, Dr. Wallace, a theme of your ministry, I would say, is soul winning.
Yes, you know, getting involved in soul winning in Chattanooga, Dr. Robertson hired me to do that. 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, 20 hours. And he would give me the visitors cards on Monday morning. And then after I had checked with all those people, then I would do block work, just knock on doors. And so I had done that for 2 years. Well, when I went to Elkton, I really didn't know how to preach. I'd never preached except those little preaching times in the factory at General Motors. But we'd have services on the bus routes in people's yards. There was no televisions in those days. And so we'd go out and show a Christian film out in the yard and have evangelistic services. And I would give the invitations and sometimes give a little message. And so it was based around soul winning, and then I did all the follow-up work to get them in, get them baptized, and get people to move their letter. So I did it very successful. Every week I'd have the results.
Yes. Can I ask you a quick question on that? Now, how would you go about the follow-up of leading somebody who's gotten saved to leading them to get baptized?
Well, once I had a list that I maintained. It always had 25, 30 names on it. And anybody that I had led to Christ, or anybody else had led to Christ who had given me the lead, I would go see them, and I would talk to them about step 2 and step 3 and step 4. And I would start working toward urging them to come. And I was able to be very successful at it. If they didn't show up, I would relax for a week or 2, but I go right back. I never let them off my list until they either moved away or else they came and got baptized or joined by letter.
Right.
And we just stayed right after it. When Brother Mike and Norris moved his family there, I told him, I said, now, Brother Mike, I would be pleased if you, Mila, and Joel, your boy, would join with us the first Sunday when you move. He said, we plan to. On the first Sunday of January in 1999. I said, well, now, okay, and I have a second request that you go with me to visit on Saturday. I have several families I'd like for you to meet. So I took him out. It was kind of a rainy Saturday, and I took Brother Mike out, and I took him to some families that had been coming to our church but hadn't joined.
Yes.
These were people who were circling. They liked our church, and they said, I think we will, but, you know. So I took him to meet this man and his wife, and I said, now, Sam and Janet, I wanted to introduce you to Brother Norris here. He's coming to pastor our church. I think you probably know that already. But he and Mila and their boy Joel are going to join our church tomorrow. And I want to, I know you've been coming, I know you've been thinking and praying about becoming a member of our church. And I want you to think about what it'll be like, say, 15, maybe 20 years from now, when you get your little granddaughter or your little great-grandson on your lap, and you say, honey, do you know what? You and me and your grandmother, we joined the church the same Sunday that our pastor did. I said,
Amen.
wouldn't that be something? I guess that would be. And so I went and I took him around to several, and 5 families joined with him that Sunday. It kind of launched it.
Wow.
But it was a matter of working at it and suggesting it and making an appeal to people.
Yes.
Well, when somebody needed to be baptized, we'd say, now look, here's what this is all about. We'd make a definite call to get them to come on and make the next step
Yes.
after. And so putting the emphasis on it really paid off.
Yes.
And it worked so well. We just kept emphasizing that as soon as you get saved, the next thing is baptism.
Amen.
Now, nowadays, you know, we have so many people who are growing up without any foundation that being baptized is just foreign to the thinking. Well, in my day, it was just understood that's next. You know, that nobody even questioned being baptized, but nowadays it's such a foreign thought
Right.
that you got a lot more work to do to get the same results.
Wow.
And you know, Dr. Rice wrote an article several years ago, and he said that he believed that we ought to have at least 200 people baptized in a year. And he said, I would like to challenge, and he offered some kind of a big recognition, some kind of a prize. I'd like to have at least 200 churches that will baptize 200. And if you're willing to do this, I'm going to make a list and we're going to publicize what you're doing and all. Well, we were having a little over 100 people baptized every year. So I wrote him a letter and said, Dr. Rice, we'll be glad to shoot for that and make a goal. So I got our staff together and we really worked, and it was work.
Yes.
I said, now fellas, we're going to depend on you and you and you, and I'm going to do it. And we had about 195, and had Dr. Rice come in the month of December. We always had him in December for his birthday. And when he came, I told him, I said, Dr. Rice, we're up to 195 on that 200. And he didn't know it, but we had 5 lined up ready to be baptized that Sunday. And so he sat on the platform, and when I baptized, Dr. Rice hollered out, that's 196. And then that's 197. And then when we got to 200, he got up and clapped his hand. Well, by the end of December, we went 214.
Oh, wow.
Well, then I told the folks, I said, now, folks, we did it. But I tell you what I want to do. On New Year's Eve, I preached on baptism, right before midnight, and I preached on who is supposed to be baptized, when are they supposed to be baptized, why are they supposed to be baptized, who's supposed to see to it that they do get baptized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
And I made up an 8.5 by 11 syllabus with about 10 or 12 pages and put that sermon in writing. I preached the sermon, stacked these up on the front desk, and then I had a box with about 500 names and addresses of people who had made professions who hadn't been baptized. And I said, now I'll tell you what I want to do. I want to set a goal of 300 baptisms this year. And I want 30 of you people to come down here and get one of these sermons. And I want you to get some of those names out of that box.
Wow.
And I want you to see to it that 10 people get baptized this year. We'll get our 300. And so they came. We had 33 come forward. And then we had 404 that year.
Wow.
And so, boy, boom, boom, boom. So just emphasis
Yes.
on it brought results. You know, we set it as a goal, and we kept talking about it, and we kept reporting how many we have so far. The accent and the emphasis brought the results.
Amen.
So we always kept thermometers on the wall about everything we were doing. So many saved, the offering's got to be this much, and the attendance has got to be this much, and then we talked about it and preached to it.
Amen.
And it was great.
Dr. Wallace, this is good. I would love to, if we could possibly maybe change course and I could like name a name, and then you could tell us some thoughts about that name of pastor.
Okay.
But maybe we could stop and maybe take a break for a few minutes. And this has been fantastic. Getting to sit down with living history, and praise the Lord. Lord has been good. By the way, as the Lord has been good to Dr. Wallace, he's good to us. And we have an opportunity in our generation to serve the Lord. And I think of the Apostle Paul. I fought a good fight. I finished my course. I've kept the faith. And it's not that you're finished, but you through the years have just kept the faith and serving the Lord. And even yesterday, you were telling a story about how you're in the hotel lobby, and there was a group of kids, and you went over there and said, let's have a Sunday school lesson. He led a bunch of them to Christ.
Yeah,
and,
amen.
What a tremendous example. Hey, God bless. Hello, we're back with Dr. Tom Wallace. I'm Pastor Matt Nettesheim, and enjoyed. Brother Wallace is a walking, you might say, historian on churches and people, great men of the past. And I want to just take a moment, just maybe mention a name and see what Brother Wallace has to say about that. Let's start with John R. Rice.
Okay. All right, I had Dr. Rice come every December. His birthday was December the 11th, and one of our ladies would make him a great big tier cake, and we'd get the whole church involved in it. And Dr. Rice was just such a gracious, gracious man. He was tender and compassionate, and he wept a lot of times when he preached. Now, outwardly, he was very forceful and strong, and some people would get the wrong idea that he was mean and hard-spirited. I invited him to come for supper at our house, and when he got there, I brought him into the living room and said, now, Dr. Rice, if you'd like to just relax here for a few minutes, and I have 4 small children, I'd like for you to be granddaddy to them. I want them to get acquainted with you. So if you'll entertain them and be granddaddy to them, I'll help Mrs. Wallace get the meal ready. And so I went away, and about 5 to 6, 7 minutes later, I came back. Dr. Rice had 2 of the children on his lap, and he had the other 2 scooted up next to him with his arms around them, being grandfather to him. Now that was the real Dr. Rice. One of our little girls in the church said, Dr. Rice, you're so handsome, except in the face. Now, she was touching on the idea that inwardly he was a jewel of a man, a real handsome man. Outside, he had bags under his eyes and a turkey gobbler thing under his neck. His skin was all wrinkled up, you know, and his bushy eyebrows. Very homely,
Yes.
but so tender and so kind. Tough, but oh so gentle.
Now, John R. Rice, Sword of the Lord newspaper.
Yeah.
I'd heard at one time that Billy Graham began to go a different direction because Billy Graham was on the board.
He was a
took
board
stand.
member. And when he began to, it all started in the big New York City crusade. Billy Graham wanted the National Council or the World Council or the New York Council. He wanted all of them to be included to bring all those people in because there were hundreds and maybe thousands of people in those groups that were unsaved. And he was thinking about how to draw in. So he allowed a lot of liberal thinking people to get involved, and that brought a big, big battle. A lot of fundamental preachers across the country began to criticize him for it.
Criticize Billy Graham?
Well, then Dr. Rice, of course, was writing articles, and he wrote articles about what was happening and explaining what was going on, and he was saying that Billy is going to the left, he's dipping colors, and of course that caused Billy to get off of his board, and that was just a real basic problem. Dr. Rice had a great impact. You know, he worked with Dr. J. Frank Norris for years down in the Dallas area, but Dr. Norris was such a fighter that he would fight issues, you know, and wound up one day killing a man with a gun, you know, who came to kill him in his office and in self-defense. And they burned Dr. Norris's house down 2 or 3 times, trying to run him out of town. And it was a vicious political matter going on in the church movement in the basic Southern Baptist Convention. But Dr. Rice and Dr. Norris were real close. They played golf together a lot.
Really?
But then all of a sudden Dr. Norris turned on Dr. Rice and started shooting and cutting him, and it split them up, and it never was well known. They didn't continue the fight, but they didn't ever get back together much on anything.
Wow.
So
did you ever meet
sad.
J. Frank Norris?
I never did. I went to his grave. Dr. Ray Barber put up a beautiful monument in Fort Worth, and while I was there, they took me out to see the monument. It's beautiful out there.
Yes.
He had such an impact, you know, and the Lord used him in such a tremendous way. but he was a forceful man.
Yes, sir.
And Dr. Rice was very kind to me. I told him on one occasion, he printed a lot of my sermons. I sent him probably 50 messages, and he printed every one of them except one. And he sent it back to me, and he said, Dr. Wallace, you and I both believe this, but neither one of us could prove it. And so I can't print it. I don't know what it was, but he really don't think we can agree on it, you know. but I told him, I said, Dr. Rice, you have promoted me far beyond my capacity to perform. He said, he smiled, he said, Dr. Wallace, we all feel that way.
Amen. Amen.
He was a jewel of a fella.
Wow. Now, J. Frank Norris, and they had a split with G.B. Vick. Did you ever
Yes.
meet G.B. Vick?
Oh yes, I knew him real well too. We used to go to Dr. Vick's every year or so. We would have about in Detroit, the Temple Baptist. We'd have about 5,000 preachers show up for a big
5,000.
preachers meeting. They would have they'd have all kinds of independent Baptists. We'd have the Canadian Baptists, the General Baptists, the GARB, the Conservative Baptists. All groups would get together, and they wrote all the sermons were put into a volume like that one we were looking at there a few minutes ago, and they would have maybe 15 or 20 sermons in there that were delivered there at the, and I had four volumes on my shelf with the sermons from those big mass meetings. Dr. Howells was moderating that meeting and on one occasion, and he said, let's have all of the Southern Baptist guys stand up, and there was several hundred of them. Let's have all of the Conservative Baptists, let's have all the Canadian Baptists stand up, let's have all the Southwide Baptists stand up. And each crowd, and then there were all different people, but they were all together. And then Dr. Howells said, now let's have all of you Baptists who can't get along with anybody, would you stand up? And so there's a bunch of them stood up. But those were fabulous meetings. Now, years later, Dr. John Rice wanted to do that again, but we had come to the place where it was almost impossible to get those groups together again. So he got together with Truman Dollar, and then he got Paul Gillette, who was with GARB. He was the the president or the moderator of the movement.
Yes.
I happened to be the moderator of the Southwide Baptist Fellowship at that time, and so they asked me to come, and then Jerry Falwell was involved in it because of his national influence, and they rented the convention center in Washington, D.C., and they had Fundamentalism 84.
Yes.
And when they got that thing set up, about 10 or 12 of us were going to be speaking, and we all went over there, and on Tuesday night we had 20,000.
Wow.
And President Reagan came, and George Bush Sr. came, and they were on the platform with all of us preachers. And I was sitting right behind the president, and in between me and the president was a Secret Service man who had a plastic thing, a board about 18 inches wide and about 2 feet like that, and he was holding it on his lap like this, and it was covered with leather. But inside was about a 3 or 4 inch plastic, I mean a hard plastic cover. And his job, in case somebody started shooting, was to put that in front of the president.
Wow.
And he was right there, and I still remember that kind of unusual thing.
Now, George Bush just passed away a couple days ago.
Yes.
Now, did he hear the gospel?
Oh yeah, he was there. Yeah, he heard the message that night, and Jerry told me, he said, Tom, I have a surprise for you. Before the session started, he took us downstairs, and you know, it was in the convention center. They had it pulled off with curtains, and you could get the little square where an exhibitor would get, and about half as big as this room. And he had an American flag in the corner there, and he took me into one of those little areas, and he said, now, I want you to stand by the flag here, and you wait for 5 or 10 minutes. He said, I'll be back. I have a surprise for you. So I was standing there waiting, wondering what my surprise was, and he opened the curtain and walked in there with President Reagan.
Oh.
And introduced me to him, And President Reagan smiled and shook my hand like he known me all his life.
Wow.
And snap, 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 you know, and so they sent me a picture, and here I am with Dr. Falwell and President Reagan and me and the American flag. So I make a big picture and put it on my desk, you know. Well then, Dr. Curtis Hudson, you know, turned this Sword of the Lord over to Shelton Smith.
Yes.
And so Shelton Smith came and joined my church, and Shelton was kind enough to provide me an office in the Sword building. So I want to move my picture down to the Sword building. But I got this problem. The Sword of the Lord is now writing articles about Jerry Falwell.
Yes, sir.
And about his drifting to the left, and so it's an issue. So I wonder what to do. So I take my picture up to the graphics department, and we have a guy named Jim up there, and I said, Jim, could you get Jerry out of this picture for me? Yeah, so no problem. So he erases Jerry out. And Jerry's already in heaven, so
Yes.
I don't think he minded.
A couple, I mean, so many subjects we're covering, but like Jerry Falwell,
Yeah.
Lynchburg,
Oh my.
On
Yeah.
Fire for God.
Yeah.
And did you know him?
Oh yeah, I preached at his super conference and had him when we had the Southwide Fellowship 3 times in Louisville at the Beth Haven Baptist. We would have over 4,000 on Monday and Tuesday night. We always had Jerry come in. This was in the beginning of his ministry. He was growing and moving, and because he was so recognized by the moral majority movement,
Yeah.
that he became a great attraction to our meetings. Always had him. So I've had him on, half a dozen times to my church. Well, then he called me, wanted me to come speak in his super conference. Now I had seen the advertising for that. They had a whole page full of advertising in all national magazines with all these different 10 or 12, maybe 15 speakers, and it was already set up. And then he calls, wants to know if I can come. And he said, Brother Tom, I want to get you to bring your wife, and I'm going to fly both of you over here and put you in the Holiday Inn Express. I'm giving you a guy with a car, and he's going to be at your disposal, and he'll take you to eat and all, and I want you to stay Monday through Friday, and I want you to preach 1 time, and I want you to be here in the conference. I said, okay, I'll do it. So I did, and I went over there, and I got to thinking, I wonder, I wasn't on that program. I wonder who I'm replacing. So I get the new one, and here I am with the new one, but then I look at the old one. E.V. Hill is missing. And so for some reason, I think Dr. E.V. Hill had started drifting off too far away from the center, and he was getting some criticism about that. And so he dropped him and stuck me in his place.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. We mentioned Dallas Billington and Beecham Vic, you know. Now, Dr. Vic worked with J. Frank Norris down in Fort Worth, you know, and Louis Insminger was the Sunday school man down there.
You know, Louis Insminger, I read his book in 1948. Louis Insminger had organized 23 of the 25 largest Sunday schools in the world.
Yeah, he was a great, great Sunday school man. Now, he did the Sunday school there, not only there, but
you met him?
Yeah.
You met
I
Louis?
never met him.
Okay.
I knew Dr. Vic, but I didn't know him. But he put that all together, and then Dr. Vic was the administrative assistant down there. Well, Dr. Vic, J. Frank Norris went up to Detroit to hold this big, big citywide meeting. And they had such a great meeting that they decided to start a church. And they launched the Temple Baptist Church. Dr. Vic moved, J. Frank Norris moved Dr. Vic up there to administrate that church and allowed Insminger to keep this one down here going. And these 2 churches became the world's 2 largest Sunday schools at the same time.
Wow.
And Dr. Vic pastored both of them, and he flew back and forth to pastor and preach at these churches. Now, later on, when Dr. Vic never got ordained, he had 10 associate pastors. He never had weddings. He never had funerals. And he always had a guest speaker every Sunday morning and Sunday night. Wednesday night he would cover the bass. And a lot of my preacher friends would go out there and preach for him. They were most Springfield graduates of
Yes.
Baptist Bible College in Springfield. And Dr. Vic would have somebody else in. Well, then after he either passed away, or I forget exactly how it happened, but then A.V. Henderson stepped in to take his place. And Dr. Henderson would have me come up once a year because he continued. He said, since Dr. Vic didn't speak, you know, he had a guest speaker, these people are used to that, and so I don't want to change that, but I don't want to do it that much. I'll speak maybe every other Sunday. So he would have people in, and he had me in once a year. I went in on this one particular Sunday. I was able to catch a flight out of Louisville and get in there early Sunday morning, plenty of time to be in Sunday school and church. And he got me in the car from the airport, and he said, now, Brother Tom, today is our special annual Christmas offering, and we have to have 300,000 in the offering, and we have to have 17,000 for the budget.
Only 300,000?
And I said, well, now, Dr. Anderson, you're not expecting me to do that, are you? He said, well, no. He said, our people do. They save all year. He said they set up a Christmas club at the bank and put $5 or $10 in it every week. They draw it out and put it in there. He said that you don't worry about it. He said, I just wanted you to know what was happening. Well, we got all through and headed out to the restaurant to have lunch. And he said, well, we made it. We got to 300,000 and we got more than 17,000. So I was real happy about that.
Oh.
But anyway, Dr. Henderson kept that going, and then later, Dr. Vic kept it going up to then, and then Truman Dollar took it. And I went to preach for Truman Dollar every year.
Now, Truman Dollar, what one time was at Kansas City Baptist Temple.
He was. He
and
did a
then
great job.
getting called to the Temple Baptist Church
yeah.
in Detroit. You knew Truman Dollar.
Yeah, I did. I preached for him in both places. I preached for him at Kansas City, and then I preached for him also.
Yeah, what was he like?
Well, he is just a great leader, you know. I preached for his father, George Dollar. Now, there's two George Dollars.
Did George Dollar that wrote the history
No, he's
book?
not the one that wrote the book.
Okay.
Bob Jones,
Yes.
some kind of association with Jones. But he was a Springfield fella, and he was in up around the Beltway in Washington, over around Herndon, Virginia, somewhere in that area. And I went in there and preached for him a time or two. In fact, I have a man in Murfreesboro right now who was a member of that church under George Dollar's ministry.
Wow.
But Truman came out of that background, did a great job out there, and then he did a good job up there. It was kind of humorous because he took on such a heavy responsibility. After we preached, he got me in his car, took me to a restaurant, and he reached over in the glove compartment of his car and pulled out a big, about almost a quart jar of Maalox. And he took the top off and took a great big sip of it, and then he wiped his lip and he smiled at me. He took another grape. He said, Brother Wallace, this church is a two-ulcer church.
Now I heard, now I don't know if you'll talk about this, but the church there in Detroit was not integrated. Black and whites, and then he had a dream of integrating the church.
I don't remember any of that. I never did know what was happening in that area. Okay. I know that one of my friends out on the East Coast, Dr. Lee Boffman, pastored the First Baptist of Newcastle, Delaware, and he had been an assistant to John Rollins in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And he called me one day and said, Brother Wallace, I want to ask you to pray for me. I said, I have a special request. I said, okay, I'll be glad to do that. And he said, Dr. Vic has invited me to come out and preach for him on Sunday morning, Sunday night. He said, they have maybe 15, 20, 25, 30 people come forward every Sunday to make professions to be baptized and join the church. And he said, and I don't have any messages that will do that. And he says, I am just really uptight about it. He said, all the guys that I went to school with, Springfield and all, they're watching like a hawk. And he said, I'm about ready to embarrass myself to death. And he said, hey, it's just really, he said, I'm thrilled with the idea of going, but he said, I'm so nervous. He said, pray for me. I said, okay. So after he got back, he called me and I said, okay, buddy, tell me how Oh, he said it was something unique. He said, Dr. Vic asked me if I would meet him there about 35, 40 minutes early. And he said, he brought me into the lobby, and we were standing by one of the doors. And he said, a man and wife walked up, and they had a couple with them. And they said, Pastor, this is Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. We won them to Christ Monday night, and then we went back on Saturday morning and spent a couple hours with them in follow-up, and they were saved Monday, and now we've helped them, and they're going to come forward this morning and be baptized and join our church. So he introduced them to Lee Baughman, and he said in a few minutes another couple, somebody else came with a man, somebody come, wow. And he said they introduced me to 38 people who were going to respond as soon as I gave the invitation. He said, I just relaxed and went on and preached. And he said, but he said, that's the way they do it every Sunday. He said, wow. Now, Dr. Vic would meet with these, and he had these 10 associates. Each one of these 10 had 200 or 300 in a Sunday school class. And that church was, at that time, one of the largest in the world. Now, in Brother Billington now, and both that Temple Baptist and Dr. Billington Church were made up of people from Kentucky and Tennessee who had migrated into Detroit.
Dallas, Billington, Akron, Ohio.
Yeah. And he had over 5,000 coming when nobody else had any. And when I went to Elkton, Maryland, you see, I was in a Catholic Episcopalian town, but during the war, about 10,000 families moved up into that general area to work in the factories to make tanks. All the car factories were making Jeeps and pickup trucks for the Army, and they were making tanks. And they were, and in our town, they had fireworks town, but they switched over to make hand grenades and bullets and guns and stuff. And so these people moved in to do this to support the people who were carrying on the World War II over in Europe and around the world. And as a result, these were all Southern people.
Right.
So when I went knocking on doors, found all these Southern people, I was from West Virginia, so it was a natural. Well, the same thing was true up there. They built that church with a Southern flavor. Vic's church and Billington's church were people who had been taken out of their pockets. We used to call them pockets of people.
Yes.
Okay, and the success was attributed basically to that. And we used to say, if you want to be a missionary to China, go to New York City and to Chinatown, and then more Chinese there than there are, and go to the Jewish place, go to that city, and so forth. Okay.
Yes.
Now, and there's just so many others. And somebody asked me, "Have you ever preached before?" I said, "Yes."
Yes, sir. And we could go through a lot. I don't mean to park back on Truman Dollar.
Yeah.
But I heard at the end
yes, it was so sad about Curtis. About Truman. The word got out. Undoubtedly, he had some sort of a mixed-up arrangement back in Kansas City, and it followed him. Some sort of a moral issue. I never did know what the details were, but it was some sort of a moral issue, and it followed him up to Detroit and began to mess up his ministry, and then it was so sad for all of us to hear that he took his own life.
Yeah.
But it was just a matter of realizing, I think, that he was going to be such a disgrace to his church and to his family and everything when whatever it was came out.
Yeah.
But it's just so sad.
Yes, sir.
But it points out that even some of the best, trip and fail, even like King David,
yes, sir.
And thank the Lord for the Lord rescuing him and listening to his plea and prayer in Psalm 51.
Yes.
We see the result of the Lord stepping back in, cleansing him and using him, and of course always in a limited capacity.
Yes, sir.
Anybody who has a background like that will have to be limited, and they'll not be able to hold certain positions and do certain things.
Yes, sir.
Because it'll open up for criticism. Yeah.
Jack Hiles.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you know him?
Oh my, yeah. He preached for me every year, and I preached for him in his pulpit on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. I don't know anybody else ever did that.
You preached at First Baptist Sunday morning at 11 o'clock.
He had a special Sunday. He said, he called me, he said, Brother Tom, I've got Lester Roloff coming to preach for me at 8 o'clock, and I got Jack Van Impe preaching for me at 9 o'clock. And he said, I have little Jimmy Dickens coming from Nashville to entertain my children in the children's church. And I want you to preach at 11 o'clock on the second coming of Jesus. We're going to break the world Sunday school record. So he flew my wife and I up there and put us in a fine hotel and had a box of chocolates and a bouquet of roses for my wife, you know, and all that. And I preached on Sunday morning. Now also he had me, he decided he would have, he'd have a preacher come in and spend the week at Crown College, or not Crown, but Hyles Anderson College. And so we had Dr. Rice come, and Dr. Rice preached, you know, around, I guess, and then he preached in chapel every day, Monday through Friday, and then he would hang around at the Commons area for 2 hours in the afternoon, and that was it. And he said, and I want you to come the second week. And then every week after that, he'd have somebody from around the country. And I was thrilled with the idea, and I went up and preached every day in chapel. And then I would hang around, and students would all come, and we'd just chat and talk,
Yes.
and they could ask questions. But you know, he came one time to our church. I had rented a big school auditorium, and I had the old preachers and the young preachers. I had Dr. Lakin.
B.R. Lakin.
B.R. Lakin, and Dr. Rice, and Lester Roloff, Jack Hyles, and John Rice. And then I had younger fellas, Johnny Pope and Bill Rice III, and then I never could remember who the third guy was. And my theme was, old guys here, they're going to pass off the scene, but we got these new guys coming on, we're going to be okay. So we can mix this all up. Well, Dr. Hyles gets up to preach, and he preaches on fresh oil.
Oh, yes.
Oh, his famous sermon. And when he got through preaching, I'll tell you, it was just, and he got up and he said, I admire Tom Wallace. I respect him greatly. He said, in fact, I got my deacons together and I said, I fly around all over the world, and he said, if anything ever happens to me, he said, the first person I want you to contact is Tom Wallace. And my people went, you know, and so and he preaches fresh oil. When he gets through, I got up and said, now, ladies and gentlemen, you have heard a message from God tonight.
Amen.
And I said, I think all my deacons are here. I said, I want to say a word to you deacons in front of all these witnesses. You know, I fly around a whole lot. If anything ever happens to me, the first person I want you to call is Jack Hyles. He got quite a kick out of that.
Oh, yes, sir. What was he like privately?
Well, he was very humorous. I don't know. He was just very polite and kind to me. I went to preach with him. I preached with him a lot in the sword conferences.
Yes.
He would set the conferences up. And I was to preach over in Sevierville, Tennessee, over near Pigeon Forge, you
Yes.
know. I can't remember which church it was over there. But I looked at the program, and it had, at 7 o'clock, Jack Hyles. At 8 o'clock, Tom Wallace. And then next morning it had 9 o'clock, Jack Hyles, 10 o'clock, Tom Wallace. And then same thing on. So I called the preacher and I said, Pastor, look, I need to tell you, I'm not going to be able to come to your meeting. Oh, he said, Brother Wallace, we've advertised all over the area. I said, I know you have, I know how you do it. But look, I just can't come. I want you to take me off the schedule. He said, well, what's wrong? I said, your schedule is what's wrong. He said, what's wrong with it? I said, you have me preaching after Jack Hyles 3 times. And I said, you just don't do that.
No,
I
sir.
said, when he gets through preaching, he has made them mad. He's had them crying. He's had their emotions have just been wrung out. And they are just totally emotionally exhausted. And you want me to get up there and follow that? I'm not going to do it. He said, well, what can I do? I said, change your schedule. Let me preach first all 3 times and I'll come. He said, "You got it." well, when Dr. Howell got there, he had set the schedule up. And he said, "Who's been messing with the schedule?" I don't know anything about that. But, you know, we had a lot of fun with him. He brought 200 kids, maybe two busloads, which would have been more than 100 choir members, to sing at our Southwide Fellowship. And they did a great job representing Miles Anderson School. Well, after it was over, he came and he said, "Brother Wallace, these kids have traveled all day to get here. They've sung for us, and they're going to have to ride all night on these buses to get home. Then they're going to have to go to school tomorrow." He said, I need to do something to show my love for them. He said, "You have a real good restaurant that I could buy them a good meal beforehand?" He said, "I'm not talking about McDonald's. I'm not talking about Hardee's now. I want a real good, classy." I said, "Well, we have Kingfish." I said, it's right down on the Dixie Highway here, and it's a big paddle boat with a great big paddle boat there pumping water around. And I said, it has a walkway, and I said, inside it's just a fabulous menu. That's good. So okay, so I called and got the reservation. Well, the kids got there first. They loaded off the buses, and they were all lined up all around there. Well, there's a moat all the way around this thing filled with water, and you have to go over that to get in it. And so these kids are all, and you can't see it. And so we bring a limousine in with Dr. Hiles in it, you know, and he gets out of the limousine. He says, "Come on, kids, come on." And he starts running over there, and he don't know about the moat, and he goes into it head first.
Oh, no.
So we fish him out, you know, try to get him dried out and everything.
Oh.
And it was quite entertaining.
What did he do when he happened? Was he jolly, or was he like...
Well, yeah, you know, I mean, he's shocked and surprised, but he adjusts real quickly to it. And you know, we had a situation where we had a crosstown busing issue in Louisville, and they passed an ordinance where all of the downtown schools would ship their kids out to the big fashionable schools in the suburbs, and the very, very fashionable young people in the suburbs would have to come down to those old beat-up schools, and our city went into revolution. Our 400 student body grew to 1,268, and we had 700 on the waiting list.
Wow.
And we inherited football players out of the public school, and I had a real good coach, and he organized a fabulous football team. Well, Hiles Anderson, the group in the Hammond Baptist High School, I guess it was, had an undefeated football team. Never been defeated. So our coach invited them to come down and play. And when they came, of course, we had all these big old guys, you know, on there, and we beat the socks off them. And I wrote Dr. Hiles a letter. I said, you know, Dr. Hiles was really a great preacher, but he's a very poor loser.
Yes, sir.
And I wrote and said, "Dear Dr. Hiles, I have anxiously been waiting for your letter of congratulations on our recent victory over your football team." I never got an answer to my question on the letter. But it was a lot of fun. Now, you know, I flew into South Carolina to preach with him, and the pastor had picked me up, and he had been kind and tender and polite to me, and we went together to the airport to get Dr. Hiles, and the very minute that Dr. Hiles got in the car, they started picking on each other. And he was just slamming him, I mean, in a very funny way. It wasn't vicious, it was funny. And he was just, you know, jabbing him, he was jabbing him. And they just jabbed each other the whole time. None of them ever jabbed me, and I didn't get involved in it. But I thought it was so unique. Now, some guys, he would just shoot at them, and they'd shoot back at him in fun. But he never did do that to me for some reason. He just never picked on me.
Yes,
I was glad.
Now, you're 89. He was slightly older than you.
He was about 2, maybe 3 years older than me.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just maybe 3.
Now, you mentioned another name, Lester Roloff. Did you ever meet him?
Yes, I did. Dr. House called me one time, and he said, he said, Brother Wallace, Lester Roloff is trying to stay out of jail, and he said a lot of us are going down there to try to help him. He
Corpus
said,
Christi?
yeah, he said, could you get loose? He said, I'd buy you a ticket if you'll go with me. And so he sent me a plane ticket, and I got a plane ticket, went into Corpus Christi. And they took me over to Brother Roloff's house, knocked on the door, and he came to the door and opened up and invited me in. And he said, come in, Brother Wallace. He said, I got a friend of yours is here. He said, he walked back and knocked on the door. Dr. House came out, and he was already there. And we were in the kitchen talking, and we looked out the window, and there was a strip of grass about 3 foot wide and about 60 foot long right out in the backyard. And Brother House said, Lester, what's that? He said, grass. He said, what are you going to do with it? He said, eat it or drink it. I'm going to drink it. So he had a juicer, and he'd go out there and cut the grass off and put it in his juicer, and he'd drink it as part of his well-known diet, you know, to drink everything instead of eat anything. And I had an associate named John Russell that was a young Jewish boy who had been saved in my church in Elkton, Maryland, who went to Bible college, came back and became my associate. And then he had his own church for about 10 years over at Rockville, Maryland, right on the Beltway. And then he came to help me in Louisville, stayed with me until he retired. And you know, I was familiar with that. Well, my secretary in Murfreesboro buzzed me and said, Pastor, there's a man out here by the name of John Russell who would like to talk with you. And I said, oh, show him in. Well, this man walked in, a total stranger walks in. And he said, Brother Wallace, my name is John Russell. He said, I work for Lester Roloff, and he sent me up here with a tractor and trailer load of oranges for you. He said, where do you want me to put them? and you never knew what Brother Roloff was going to do. In some of my sermons, I heard him in Tennessee Temple, and we had a sign on the wall at the school, where God guides, he provides.
Amen.
And he said, I see that sign over there. He said, I want to translate that into Texan for you kids. He said, where he leads, he feeds. I said, I like that version better, you know. And I tell folks, and when I preach about that, I said, we had this fellow, a big old tall, skinny, bald-headed preacher come up here from Texas. I think his name was, let's see, was Fall Off? No, Get Off, Jump Off? No, Roll Off, that's what it was. but I knew him real well.
Was he kind and?
Oh, yeah. Now, and he could get real mean when he preached. I shared with Dr. Hiles in Tennessee, back over in that Pigeon Forge meeting, that I was going to give my resignation. And I said, I'm going to resign. And he hollered at me. He hollered, no. You could have heard him for a mile.
Hiles?
Yeah. No. And that night, when we finished the meeting, we went into our motel rooms, and he was in the next room, and I found out that my bed was against the wall here, and his bed was against the wall here, and I was sleeping about 1.5 feet from him. And my head was just, you know, within about 2 feet of him. And I woke up about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the Lord just said, now, I don't want you to resign. I don't want you to do that. You just change your mind about it. So the next morning, we both went down to the airport to catch a plane. And I said, Brother Hiles, I made a decision during the night. He said, really? I said, I decided I'm not going to do that. He said, I knew that. And I said, I surmised that he was over there praying for me while I was.
Yes, sir.
I just surmised that he was talking to the Lord, and Lord, you got to tell him, and then the Lord did tell me, and so I didn't do it. But the very next week, we had the Southwide, and Roloff and Hiles were both there, and Brother Hiles had talked to Brother Roloff about it. And both of them got up and preached at this national meeting with 4,000 people, 1,500 of them preachers, and they both preached to me. They didn't preach to anybody else. They just, you might as well call my name. But Hal got up and he preached on regions that you don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4. And when Roloff got up, he did exactly the same. I mean, it was so obvious. And then Dr. Howells told me, he said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to help you. I'm going to try to encourage you. I said, okay. He said, you'll hear from me. Well, the next week I went to the post office and found a letter from him. And I opened it up. It was from First Baptist of Hammond. I opened it up, and it didn't say anything. He had a blank sheet of paper with a check for $200 made out to me. It didn't say anything. It just, it was. Well, the next week I get another one, and the same thing. And the next week, and then next month I get it, and next month, it went on for first year, and second year, third year. Every week for 3 years, he sent me that $200.
Wow.
Just, he said, and he had told me, he said, now I don't want you to use what I send you for anything you're doing now. He said, I want you to come up with some ideas of some fresh things you can do to encourage you and to stir your people and all. So I hired a guy to go soul winning full time with that.
Yes, sir.
Kept him out there all the time so he could have people coming in, and I told somebody about that. I said, he did this, and I explained what he did. And this guy said, would you believe that he probably does that for a couple hundred people?
Wow.
That he helps everybody in the country. Because he had all kinds of money coming in from his books, and he's mailing out tapes and everything, and he had a full salary. And he was using all of his money. And when I read those books about him being accused of helping some women, and that mean he was having an affair with them, I said, he's helping women. He helped everybody.
Yes.
And I said, you're not going to convict him on that kind of testimony, because I know different.
Yeah, I talked to a man named D.M. Hardison.
Oh, I know Brother Hardison. I had him in meeting.
Yeah, but
preached with him too.
Before about 2 weeks before Brother Howells died, he had sent a check to D.M. Hardison for $1,000 just to be a blessing.
Yeah.
And he said, D.M. Hardison said the same thing. He did that to so many people. He just wanted to be a blessing.
Yeah.
And you knew D.M. Hardison?
Oh, I knew him. I had him. He would fly in his little plane up to Elkton and preach for me. I preached with him in a meeting over in Beaver, West Virginia.
Oh, wow.
And he was instrumental in helping us start the IFFB, the International Fellowship of Fundamental Baptists.
Yes.
And we used to come here to Good News Baptist Church, where he pastored.
Yes. Did you preach in Good News?
I've been here many times at Good News.
Oh, wow.
And I used to come down. I was on the board at Virginia Bible College that he started, or he was involved. And let's see, who was the other fellow? Robertson? U.G. Robertson?
Yeah, U.G. Robertson.
Right here in Portsmouth, I believe.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, those
Central
fellows,
Baptist Church.
Those fellows were kind of the key to the Virginia Bible College, and we were having a graduation service up around toward Richmond somewhere, and Herb Fitzpatrick was up in the Washington area. Herb had a song leader. I can't remember his name, but he was just he was a Baptist Bible Fellowship guy, and the guy was a fabulous musician. And we were having a graduation service for this Virginia Bible College, and they brought me over to speak. And I getting ready, and we all had our hats on, and it was hot, and we had these black robes, and and here these Robertson and Eugene, all of us didn't fit, none of us, and it was formal and starchy. So the song leader got up and said, "Tell you what, let's sing that old Hornet song." The old Hornet song that Bob Finley and he used to sing, and it's, they weren't willing, but God made them willing to go. And it was just a fun song right in the middle of all that formality, and it broke the ice.
Oh.
And everybody started laughing, everybody relaxed, and we had good service after that.
Yes, sir.
But I know Brother Harson passed away here. They told me his wife is still here in a nursing home somewhere.
Is. And he would take me to Chick-fil-A. He loved Chick-fil-A.
Oh, yeah.
And we'd sit there for hours talking.
Yeah.
He was a great man. And what a blessing.
We had this IFFB meeting. The first meeting was over in Urban Street Baptist in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. That thing's been going on now for almost 60 years. Now, I dropped out for a long time, but I had the meeting in my church in Elkton. I had it in Louisville. We'd have James Earls come out of this area, and there was the fella had that Urban Street Baptist. That was our first meeting, and they've had it every February and every August for all these years now. And each year we go down to somewhere in Florida, Fort Myers or Orlando. This coming year, I'm going to speak Sunday morning for Steve Ware. Steve's brother Bob was pastor here in North Carolina.
Yeah, Edenton, North Carolina.
Edenton, yep. Right here close by, and he was a part of our deal here. And now his brother Steve has his church.
Yes.
And the last 3 or 4 years we've been going there, and he always has me come in on Sunday, and then the other guys come in Monday night through Tuesday night.
Yes.
And I'll be going back in this year. But that meeting, and then we go north and have it up in New York or New Jersey somewhere during the summertime. But that, and we're gonna have 65, 70 preachers there.
Yes.
It's been going on all these years. It's not real big, but it's just a group that have good fellowship. But Brother Harson's been involved in that, and he spoke about 2 or 3 years ago to the meeting down in Florida. And then, then after that he was decapitated. He couldn't get around much.
Yes. Wow.
So,
now, another Hugh Pyle?
Oh my, yeah. I had Hugh Pyle in my church. I preached in his church in the Southwide Baptist Fellowship years ago. My son-in-law is now pastoring the church in Panama City that he had.
Wow.
Recently just sold the big buildings that he had. He had so many buildings, and the church is down a good bit because of going through 2 or 3 different stages and different types of preachers. But this past, about 2 months ago, the hurricane came through there and destroyed both the old church and the new church that he has.
Wow.
And they're trying right now to get the new. They had a $4 million damage to the church that they bought after they sold that, but it destroyed the old church that Hugh Powell had also. Oh. And I don't know, because they had sold that to a big school that had about 800 kids coming to school, and they weren't using it for a church at this point. But he got enough money out to pay cash for this, and it really helped.
Yes, sir.
But then this church got tore up too.
Hugh Powell wrote that book on preachers, what every preacher ought to know. A wonderful book.
He wrote me a letter one time. He said, Brother Wallace, I'd like to use a title, and I think it's your title, and I want your permission. He said, it's called How to Keep the Honey in the Honeymoon. And I wrote back and said, Brother Powell, thank you for checking with me on this, but that's not my title. I borrowed that from my guy over in New Jersey.
Oh, wow. Another name, like Hugh Pyle, led Peter Ruckman to Christ. Did you ever meet Peter Ruckman?
I did. Mm-hmm.
And, very controversial figure.
Oh my, yeah. I was a member of the First Baptist Church of Elkton, Maryland, before I went to school. It was an independent church. The night I left to go to Tennessee Temple, they voted to go into the convention. And I voted against it. I didn't know anything about it, but I knew my pastor was not in favor of it. My pastor was a brother-in-law to J.R. Faulkner.
Yeah.
And he had graduated from Temple's 2-year course and then come to King's College up in Georgetown, up in Delaware area, right near Newcastle. And I came back after my first time at Temple, the first time I came home. I heard that First Baptist was having a revival, and Peter Ruckman was preaching, so I went down to hear him.
Where was that at?
In Elkton, Maryland.
Okay.
First Baptist. Well, when I walked in, some of the folks said, "Oh, Brother Wallace," he said, "the men are having a prayer meeting in here. Would you want to?" I said, "Oh, yeah." So I slipped in the prayer meeting, and Peter Ruckman was praying, and he prayed, "Oh Lord, you know, that old Sunday school superintendent who's here Sunday parading around like a peacock. He said, Lord, you ought to kill him. He said, these people deserve somebody better than that." And I thought, oh my soul, what a way for a man to pray, because, what that's going to do to this church. These folks are going to, and he prayed all the, and then he preached, and of course he was such a genius, he did capture you of what he had to say. But then I wasn't aware of all those issues back in those days.
Yes.
Well, I went down to Pensacola, and they told me that he was having an art show. He was an artist. The Canton Baptist Temple has this huge, really museum around their whole. The auditorium is built around a large, aisles all the way around, and all the walls are covered with paintings of Moody and Finney and Spurgeon, and then they were including John Rice, and about half those paintings were painted by Peter Ruckman.
Wow.
The other half were painted by a man by the name of DeWitt, who was out of New Jersey. And DeWitt came to my church and during a short conference and asked Dr. Rice if he'd allow him to paint his picture. And Dr. Rice said he would, so he painted a big, like 2 foot by 3 foot. And Dr. Rice still has it down in the Sword building, or it's still there with Dr. Smith kept it up. But Dr. DeWitt asked, he said, Brother Wallace, would you let me paint your picture? And I said, well, I'd be honored. So he said, send me a 5x7. So I sent him a 5x7 picture, and he sent it back. He said, this one doesn't have any character in it. Would you send me another one? I wrote him back and said, well, you got to have character to get a picture of it. I said,
yes,
I guess.
Sir.
But anyway, I decided I would go down to the art show and see his paintings. So I get down there and it's starting to sprinkle, and he's loading it all up. And I went up and introduced myself to him, and I said, I don't have time. He said, yeah. And he was as rude as he could be, and he just didn't give me the time of day. And I just turned around and walked off. And it just I don't know what it was about it. He just didn't have time for me. And then they told me that he had a Jeep. And he pulled up to a place where a train was going by, and he was in a hurry, and he was frustrated and all, and the train just kept going back and forth and all, and right there, at the Pensacola Christian College. And he said he just put it in gear, rammed the train, and broke his leg. So it's kind of interesting about people.
Yes,
yeah. So I don't know about all of these problems with the King James Version versus,
That's what I was going to ask you.
I've studied a little bit on that, but I've never become much of an expert in that area.
Yes, sir.
But I know his boys were nasty and mean, and they would come up to Tennessee Temple. They'd be about 2 van loads of them would unload and get in the square down there on the corners, and they would get their Bibles out and preach to the students and tell them, if you don't get born again, you're going to hell. You're all lost. And,
Yeah.
and it was really a bad scene. And I just kind of, I said, I need to back up. I don't know what all's involved. I'm not going to get near that.
Yes, sir. Wow. So the King James Bible issue, that wasn't even an issue for years, was it?
No, I never, Dr. Rice didn't really get into that, because he would, every once in a while, he would quote something else, and then a lot of those old timers that we have a confidence in, were talking about some of the other, but then when somebody brought out some of the truth about it, what they were saying was right, and it became an issue, and I guess still is, and it's become more important than it was. But the accent was somewhere else, and nobody paid a lot of attention to it. They were busy. Like the big citywide meetings, Dr. Rice was having hundreds and hundreds of people saved.
Yes, sir.
Billy Graham was having thousands of people saved and all that. And of course, they stayed away from all those because it was a matter of evangelism. Now, the weakness is that they have thousands of people saved, but they didn't do a whole lot of churches. Some of the people like Sam Jones, J. Wilbur Chapman, and some of those fellows, when they'd go to a town, say 5 or 6 weeks, they would end up with a big church being built. And a lot of churches were started.
Yes.
I read about R.A. Torrey going down to New Zealand. They had thousands and thousands of people saved. I get down to Australia and New Zealand, and you can't find a church anywhere. And I wonder, they got all those people saved, and I believe they really did get them saved, but they didn't get any churches started, and so it all died out after it wasn't long before it was all done. So they missed something somewhere.
Yes.
It has to be channeled into a local church program to continue.
Yeah. Now, music through the years, that probably wasn't even an issue, really.
No. Nobody paid much attention. You know, there was a difference between the operatic type, what we'd call the Bob Jones flavored music, and maybe Southern gospel. We would always have a little mixture because we always had a lot of Southern people who were used to it. But when and we were beginning to have a little issue when I took the church at Franklin Road. We had beautiful music, but we had a lot of Southern people, and some of them would want to hear a quartet, you know, and so I talked to Brother Norris about it. I didn't have to deal with it because one of our best organists, you know, was real happy, and she was, but she went over to BJ 2 or 3 summers for special seminars. When she came back, she left our church, and because we'd have a quartet in once in a while. Well, when Brother Mike came, I told him about it, and he got us all together, and he drew a chart on the blackboard. He said, "Look, you got this," and he drew a line from here way up to the top, and they drew one way down there, and then he put one right in the middle. He said, "Now music falls into this operatic high music, and then you got quartets here in the Southern gospel, you know, about Daddy's gone to heaven, and then we all cried." And he said, and then he said, "Now right here in the middle," he said, now our church, we're not this, but he said, every once in a while we're going to have this, and I don't want you people complaining about it. He said, this is good music, and
Yes.
it says something. Frank Garlock's got a message in his music, you know. And he says, now we're going to have one of these in here once in a while. And I don't want you people getting upset now. Our music's going to be right in here. And he said, every once in a while we go there, but this is us here.
Yes.
Now, get off of it. So he wouldn't let it be an issue, and it hasn't. And we have the finest music in the world. I was so thrilled when I hear now. Recently we had somebody just get up and leave because they said the song that the choir sang was just a great message and a great music, but the guy who wrote it is not us. And so they went to battle on the fact, and they said, well, who cares who he is? This is, and this you couldn't criticize this. Anybody says anything about this, they'd be stupid.
Yes.
But it was written by somebody who didn't have it, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's an issue now too, you know, about who's writing the music. You know, so you know, and then some of that is coming up with some of the schools. You know, the chapel school is struggling a little bit with some criticism over some of that.
Yes.
And so that you know, that can be an issue. The main thing is, of course, to keep the main thing, and not allow those issues to come up and fester and become boils.
Would it be similar to Curtis Hudson, national issues rather than church?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you've been a pastor for so many years.
Yeah.
You working at the pastoral level,
Yeah.
not to bring all these national issues and fights into the local church.
See, when I got to Franklin Road, they wanted to bring the issue with Brother Hiles into my church. And I said, look, he's up there in Hammond, we're here in Franklin Road. I said, now look, because there's an issue, I'm not going to have him come here. And because of the issue, I'm not going to go there. So I'm staying out of that. Now, also, I'm going to keep this church out of it. And I don't want you getting this church into it, because we have some other things to do here.
Yeah.
And we're not going to bring that issue over here. This is a local church. And I zeroed in on that, and everybody accepted that. And you know, somebody come on, what do you think about us? Who's that? Hiles? I don't even believe I know him.
Right.
I wouldn't have thought about that.
Wow. Praise the Lord. Maybe this has been great. This has been great. This generation of younger pastors and preachers, if you had just some advice, and it seems like things are more interconnected, a little bit more social media and different things like that. But do you have any advice for the younger preachers?
Well, I don't know, you know, if on social media, you know, they deal with everything that breathes. And person could spend their life involved in that, but just like any of the other issues, I think we need to find God's plan and will for our lives and give ourselves to it and refuse to get distracted. Those are distractions.
Yes.
And they pull us away from the main purpose. And and when we get to heaven, we're going to all bow down with the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders and all the saints and all the angels, and we're going to say, worthy is the Lamb, and we're not going to worry about that issue and that issue and that issue. It's all going to be centered on, and that draws us together. And we need to, we need to get biblical truth and preach Christ and teach the basics of the Bible and not allow these issues. Those issues may need to be, like the issue of communism back in Carl McIntyre's day. He was on 1,000 radio stations every day across the nation, and we would have him in once a year to teach our people about the problem and the evils of communism in Washington. Some of the senators are communists, and he was pointing it out, and they were cutting in and criticizing him, but that somebody said, you need to be doing that. And I said, well, God bless Carl McIntyre. That's not my calling. The Lord's called him to do it, and I say amen, and let's give him an offering and help him. But not me. My job is to win souls. I said, if I can win a soul, I'll keep him from communism.
Yes.
He won't be a communist if I get him saved.
Yes.
And I'm not going to spend my time on liquor, because if I get him saved, he won't drink liquor. And I'm not going to spend my time on abortion. And I said, I'm going to deal with these things once a year, but we're not going to do this every Sunday now. Okay?
Yes.
And this is my idea that those things have to be touched on, but they can't be the issue. And some of the guys, they get to be hobby horses, and as a result, their church goes down, 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 down. I went to a meeting one time to hear a guy by the name of Bob Alton, and he was a fantastic preacher, and he was preaching for one of my preacher boys. I wanted to show interest, and I dropped in there. And I was running 1,000 Sunday school, and this boy was running about 60, and he was preaching for him. And when I walked through the door, I heard his theme. He was preaching a tremendous sermon, and all of a sudden he just changed, and he started preaching to me. He said, I'd rather have 200 in a church than to have 1,000 of them and know that 800 of them didn't really mean it. Right at me. And so we got all through. I said, you know what? I figure that church of 200 you got, you'll have 80% of them that won't mean it too. And I said, I'd rather have 1,000 with 200 that mean it than I would 200 and only about 30 or 40 mean it. Would that make sense?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Oh, so many interesting stories. You've been a blessing.
Well, thank you.
Praise the Lord. So this has been good. And thank you, Dr. Wallace, for your time and your effort and your injury, and you're just a good example.
Well, praise the Lord. I'm hoping the Lord let me continue a little while with it.
And praise the Lord.
Yeah.
At 89.
My goal is to do more from this point out, or make more impact than I have for the last 68 or 69 years. And I thought, now that is a big order, because the Lord has allowed me to have a lot of successful ministry.
Yeah.
And the Lord just seemed to say to me, and it's really easy for me to answer that prayer for you. He said, I'm going to let you win some young fella, and I want you to help him go to Bible college and take him to some soul winning conferences and some Bible conferences, and get him around the right people, and then he'll turn out to be a D.L. Moody and he'll do more than you ever thought about doing.
Yes.
He said, all you gotta do is win that one guy. And so I feel like I went to a Bible college the last 2 years, and I just got home 2 weeks ago from a little college over Marietta, Ohio, where they have almost 100 students from the Philippines and from New Guinea and from Nigeria, and they got a couple from India. And they bring them in and give them free room and board and free tuition. And he has preachers all around coming in, and they said, come in and make impact, and you will be able to preach all over the world through these kids. So I've done it the last 2 years.
Wow.
And I figured that way I could reproduce myself through somebody else. So maybe I could get my prayer answered and accomplish more from here on out.
Yes.
2 or 3, 4 years compared to 68.
Yes.
Okay.
Hey,
Well,
thank you
good.
very much. This
You're
has
welcome.
been good. Have a good day.